I'm Flic, and you're listening to Everyday Burnout Conversations. This is the honest podcast that shares burnout expertise along with the stories of others from all walks of life that strive to inspire and help you manage and avoid burnout. Now, my passion for burnout and self-care came about when I became a mental health writer who'd lost her own mental health to severe burnout, and it's an irony that's not lost on me. So get set to enjoy another great conversation, delightfully wrapped up in some wisdom, humour and great storytelling. Enjoy. In this Everyday Burnout Conversation, I chat with Michaela Thomas. Michaela is a Senior Clinical Psychologist. She's a CBT Psychotherapist and couples therapist. Michaela is the founder and clinical director of the Thomas Connection, and she's the author of The Lasting Connection and host of the podcast Pause, Purpose, Play. Michaela runs the Burnout to Burn Bright program, and she's creating a new program called Lost Girls, aiming to support women with ADHD who have been misdiagnosed or went unrecognised in their childhood. In this chat, Michaela shares the challenges faced by women with ADHD, since perfectionism and people-pleasing, well, they're often coping mechanisms that are developed. She sheds light on the everyday experiences, such as the toll of constant demands and the emotional labour involved in maintaining a facade of normalcy in environments that rarely cater to neurodivergent needs. Michaela candidly talks about navigating the path to her own recent ADHD diagnosis, and we peel back the curtain on the silent battles those with ADHD face, discussing the importance of self-compassion and how to manage ADHD-related overwhelm. So join us for this heartfelt conversation that it illuminates the nuances of ADHD and burnout and celebrates the compassion and strength found in community and self-care. Oh, and if you find this podcast helpful, then please consider giving it a like, a subscribe, or sharing it with someone in your circle, as it truly helps these positive messages and conversations reach that little bit further and hopefully help others feel less alone. So, without further ado, here's Michaela Thomas.
Oh, Michaela! Oh my gosh, we're finally here. We're finally sat together having a good old burnout chat.
We are indeed. I'm really excited about this one.
I know, because I think we've been following each other on Instagram for a few years now, haven't we?
Yeah.
Love the message and work you're putting out there. So this is a real treat. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me and for being patient with me cancelling probably a couple of times. But we got there.
It's life. I think I've cancelled on you as well because life throws curveballs. So I just love that we're here today. So thank you.
That's interesting as well. That's a good starting point because I didn't keep track of that. I just kept track of the fact that I'd cancelled. So this is kind of what the ADHD brain does as well, that we have that negativity bias about our own performance and don't judge other people to the same yardstick that we judge ourselves.
See, the wisdom is coming through already. So to start us off, do you want to share a little bit about your personal story, your personal experiences with burnout?
Of course. I think of it as the experience of sitting on the second step of the stairs. I was sat in my flat, in a masonette flat outside of London, and I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't make myself get off the steps and go to work. So this was years back. This was when I was working in the NHS as a clinical psychologist and CBT therapist, and I was just overwhelmed and overworked. And obviously I didn't know at the time that that was linked to my ADHD brain, which I know now. But at the time, I just thought there was just never enough of me. You know, the pressures of the NHS, the demands, there were so many people who were struggling. And I have always had a deeply feeling heart, you know, deeply compassionate and empathetic with other people. This is obviously how I've made a career in psychology, and helping others is part of my purpose, part of my drive. And I think it just got the better of me. I worked in a service through no fault of its own. Nobody was horribly mean or anything. They were just working in a system where they would happily accept anyone going above and beyond for nothing. Anyone who was perfectionistic like I was, it was just a system that welcomed that, because that meant you took more patients, you had more on your caseload, you took more responsibility, And I was even referred to as, we don't have to manage Michaela because she manages herself. I was such a good girl, you know. So fast forward to today, obviously now I'm 40, mother of 2, you know, the business owner of a thriving psychology practice. I have put a lot of different things in place now so that I don't ever come to that point where I sat on the stairs ever again.
Yeah. It's interesting. I worked in the NHS too, and I've actually had a couple of people I used to work with reach out to me recently because obviously some either Instagram posts or podcasts have resonated, and I think it's so prevalent in the National Health Service because, as you say, like, people are drawn to caring because they have this empathy and compassion and they want to make a difference, and you know, it feels so good to help someone, doesn't it? Like, it's every fiber of our being. But you're so right, there's an element of it's that badge of honor if you're resilient, if you keep going. I know.
Yeah. And then the more people you help, the better you feel. And even in my burnout episode, I still never felt like I don't want to go and see my patients. That was the bit that got me through. You know, I was even thinking, do I need to be signed off sick from work? And I was actually, no, I'm enjoying the work I do. I just didn't enjoy the structure that I was doing the work in. I didn't enjoy the environment. And now I obviously know that it wasn't conducive to my ADHD brain because I didn't have any middle ground. I couldn't just go for like a slow and sustainable pace. At that point, I went all or nothing. And that meant that certain aspects of the job, which are very, very important and crucial for clinical psychology to work, I really struggled with. And things like report writing, because obviously where's the dopamine in that, right? There's no fun. I loved all the contact with the patients, and obviously now the same thing with my clients today. That is the bit that lights me on fire. I am highly energized when I'm with other people, but then I use up all my spoons, as we metaphorically say. I use up all my efforts on that. And then when you come to the end of the day and you just have to like sort out your notes and write all the letters, I'm like, no. And obviously I didn't know at the time that it was to do with it not being fun, because it's like, who enjoys doing things that are not fun? It's very human. But the demand avoidance that comes with the ADHD brain is it's of a different level. It's not like, oh, I can't be bothered because that doesn't bring joy to my life. It's not like you sort of Marie Kondoing your way out of responsibility. It's just hard to make yourself start and initiate tasks that require you to do things you don't enjoy.
Oh my God.
So very low boredom tolerance.
I'm already going, yeah, I can relate to that.
Well, we kind of know that this could be a conversation which is eye-opening for you and your listeners about,
I was going to
say, why I've been burnt out.
It's going to be eye-opening for me, but I know I'm not alone. So I'm going to be very candid in this because I know someone else will be listening to this going, yep, I'm right there with Flic. So This is really interesting. Can you explain a little bit about the dopamine and why it keeps us on that hamster wheel? Because I think this is fascinating.
So dopamine is sort of linked with reward in some ways. That sort of the feel-good hormone in some ways. That sort of actually, I feel like it's a sense of satisfaction or achievement, or like tick, ding, 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 ding. Sort of that's how we might feel if you go into a casino and you put money in the slot machines, or you scratch a scratch card, or you order something on Amazon that you don't actually really need, and then it comes delivered and you're like, oh, here's that thing, because the dopamine is in that moment of you ordering the thing, and then when it arrives, all right, okay, I didn't really need that. It's the same thing that makes us check our phone notifications over and over again, because when we do get a new message, dopamine is almost like lights us up, like, oh, here we go, I got rewarded for checking that. This is why we get stuck in scroll holes on Instagram, because there's always new content refreshing. There's always more things to stimulate your brain with. So dopamine, when we have too much of it, I mean, we're talking extreme levels, it can be linked with things like manic episodes. Where we have not enough of it, it can be linked with depressive episodes. So we are actually too flat to do anything. I'm not bothered. I don't feel any pleasure. I feel no interest in things. I feel indifferent, etc. And when there's too much of it, it can be exhausting because you're burning through all your cylinders. And like it's almost like a frantic energy, and you might do or say things that you then regret later. So that's not to say that ADHD is the same as being bipolar or what used to be called manic depressive, but we know that dopamine has a very important role in our emotional systems as well. It's also linked with serotonin, which is more to do with how we feel good. So serotonin is often low in people who are depressed. So all of these different neurotransmitters link to each other, but dopamine is particularly important when we're talking about ADHD because it can be explained why we then do impulsive stuff or say things or get stuck in things that might even be addictive because we want that dopamine reward. It stimulates the brain. So this is why also ADHD medication is stimulants, because your brain is actually trying to find ways of stimulating itself. It's understimulated rather than overstimulated. And that's where we're thinking about the hamster wheel that you mentioned, why that's so easy to get caught in that, because it provides a dopamine hit, it provides a bit of a reward. I've ticked something off, or I completed a job, or someone gave me praise, well done for doing this thing. And then we can get stuck in being overproductive and over-functioning, despite it actually having a really negative impact on our energy levels, actually sucking us dry with energy, hollowing us out or depleting us to the point of burnout, because it just feels so good to have it. We can see that even in mice running in wheels, that if you give them certain types of stimulants, they will run until they drop dead, basically, because they override this natural need to rest and recover. And that's something that can happen in ADHD burnout, that we just don't heed this need to rest and recover because we can't feel the cues coming from inside us. It's called interoceptive cues, like the body signals that says, you're now thirsty, you need to go to the toilet, you need a break, you've been working for too long. All of those can be quite weak in the ADHD brain. So that's why we override it, run a bit faster for a bit longer on the hamster wheel, and burn out.
Oh my goodness. Oh, Michaela. Like, what are we? 10 minutes in. 10 minutes in, and I'm already like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic.
Bring out the tissues.
I know. This is amazing. I mean, and you must work with many women who who are on that hamster wheel, and then the days when the dopamine isn't there, are they then picking up the stick and beating themselves with it because they're not being active enough and they feel they should, and what's wrong with me?
Oh yeah, absolutely, because that's the sense of it's the all or nothingness of the ADHD brain. That can mean that we either have a now or not now tendency. Now is like, I need to do this thing right now. I'm clicking my fingers. I need to do this right now. I can't wait. I have to do it now. That can include not being able to avoid looking at your emails because they could be right there. Something could have happened, versus not now, which is, I can't make myself look at that email. I just need to procrastinate the crap out of that, and I can't get started, can't get going. So the now versus not now of the two modes there means that there's very hard to find a middle ground of doing little bits here and there and often. And it tends to be instead of like spikes of activity, which can be very tiring. And then this self-criticism, the stick you mentioning of beating ourselves with, the self-criticism then comes out because of the comparison, the unfair comparison with neurotypicals who are able to find more of an even pace in their work, and continue to produce work Monday to Friday, 8 hours a day, whereas the ADHD usually doesn't do that. It might be like, here's like the inspiration strikes and suddenly you can produce 8 hours work in 2 hours, but then you need to rest for 6 hours watching Netflix to compensate.
Yes, absolutely. And when we're working in systems that, very 9 till 5 and being in a box, there isn't necessarily that recognition for that piece. And then it's very easy to get stuck in a what's wrong with me. Because let's face it, if you have grown up with an ADHD brain and it hasn't been diagnosed, you would have learned as a kid to mask and function within these systems.
Yeah, absolutely, at a great personal cost. So masking is a great thing that you bring that up. So masking means that we're essentially suppressing who we really are, hiding the neurodivergent brain so that we will try to fit in, quote unquote, in society. But essentially, it's very costly. It's draining of energy, and it might mean that you're having to kind of watch the game, watching what people are doing, how they're talking, what are they saying, what are they doing, and might mean that you suppress things that could actually be quite calming and neutralizing for you. So it might be that people then suppress their fidgeting or so-called stimming, things we might need to do to stimulate our brains. It might mean that you stop gesturing, instead you sort of like, I must sit still, or it's rude to say these things, or I must not speak up in the meeting, like, wait your turn, Michaela. The amount of meetings I had were like, I shall not say anything today. Like, I do not have to share all my ideas. They're like, just make space for other people. And I'm not because I'm rude or self-centered or because I think my ideas are better than anyone else's. It's just because I'm passionate. And when I get drawn into something, I'm like, oh, this is really exciting. It then becomes harder to like sit with that self-control. And self-control also goes down over the course of the day. So when people have been masking all day long, sitting in meetings where you're expected to listen, even though you're really bored, sitting in meetings that could have been an email, reading emails that could have not been sent, when we have this sort of sense of, I have no tolerance for this crap. When you do that across the day, when you come to the end of the afternoon or the evening, when you come home, you have run out of all your spoons, you've run out of all your capacity because you've been masking all day or trying to do these compensatory strategies. And that can essentially be very costly in terms of energy. And it's very common for me to hear that, ADHD women who use a lot of social skills at work or have, the needs of dependence, like caring responsibilities for children or aging parents, at the end of the day, they're like, don't touch me, don't talk to me. I just want to be alone. I just want to watch TV, or I just want to go to sleep. And they can feel like they're so overstimulated because essentially their brain is understimulated. And that means that they feel overwhelmed. And at the end of the day, they've got nothing left. So this is why it's so important to learn to watch this, to learn to almost like assess your own levels of energy, much like a diabetic would prick a finger to see the glucose levels, to see what action they need to take. We need to do that as ADHDers to see, where's my energy? Do I need to recharge? How do I plug myself in right now? Like I would plug my phone in to let that charge, unless I would forget. This is why I carry an energy bank with me, like one of those power banks, because I often forget to charge my phone. But now I have a system of having a power bank with me. So then what's the equivalent of that? Like, how can I have a power bank with me to fuel up my own energy, knowing that I will get this wrong, I will forget to look after myself because I've been caring too strongly for others or giving too freely. So knowing that with an inner wisdom, a compassionate sense of wisdom around yourself, knowing your tendencies, knowing your patterns, that self-awareness is everything when it comes to managing ADHD and preventing ADHD burnout.
Oh, and so empowering as well. Because, okay, so what led you down the path to being assessed and diagnosed?
I've been wondering about that for a few years. I thought about it when I was pregnant with my second child as well. She's now 2 and a bit. And honest to God, the paperwork was too complicated for me to proceed with it at the time, which I thought was quite indicative in itself. The fact that I just couldn't get myself organized to pursue the assessment. And then I thought, actually, that's probably not the best reflection of who I am and how my brain functions normally when I'm pregnant, because hormonally things are different. So I decided to leave it until after I've had the baby. So I pursued diagnosis about a year ago. And yeah, I just had to have a fresh start with someone else who'd made the paperwork route more accessible. Someone who, helped with organizing everything was sort of just laid out for me. And the reason why I went for it then was because I finished breastfeeding my second child. And that means that estrogen levels are dropping. and estrogen is very important for the ADHD brain for women of my age. Now I've just turned 40. So I was 39, I was postnatal, wasn't sleeping very well, estrogen levels were dropping, and that meant that I got horrendous brain fog. I was struggling to concentrate, and I know that these things have been with me since, my whole life. I've always had a dreamy mind, but I obviously now know that that dreamy mind is the same mind that's able to conjure up podcast episodes and write a book and create things. So it's a kind of a blessing. I don't want to say blessing and a curse, because I don't want to think of my ADHD as a curse. It's part of who I am. But go back a year ago, obviously I didn't know that. So I've had quite the journey of self-acceptance and self-awareness and training my brain to try to function as optimally as possible with this. But I've known for many years that I have a differently wired brain anyway, because I was part of Mensa when I was about 20. I joined Mensa, which means it's, I have a differently wired brain in the sense it's giftedness. So that means that not only am I ADHD, I'm also gifted, which means it's referred to as twice exceptional. You're exceptional in two ways.
Okay.
So I've already known that means I'm a little bit of that kind of nutty professor vibe, that sometimes I can come up with the most intricate ideas and then not effectively tie my shoelaces, metaphorically. So I've known that that's a kind of a strength and a weakness to my life. But having the diagnosis has meant that I was able to put everything in place and understand why I had been perfectionistic, why I had been hard on myself. It made sense of the shame. It made sense of how I look to other people, how I need connection with other people, why I'm very energized by that interaction with others, and equally why I then sometimes have to rest and lie in a dark room after I've had interaction with others. So it's completely revolutionized the way I see self-care and self-compassion and how I run my business, how I do my parenting. It's completely changed the way I relate with my husband, obviously as a couples therapist as well. And I wrote a book on how to develop love and compassion for yourself and your partner. So all of that just basically fell into place and it kind of made sense. And coming back to what you said earlier, that it's so difficult for the neurodivergent brain to function in these systems that require the 9 to 5 and like must sit at your desk and can't pace around when you have a conversation on the phone, etc. All of these pressures and requirements is what causes an increase for ADHDers to be entrepreneurs, 300 to 400% more likely to be an entrepreneur, because you call your own shots, you run their own show.
Yes, absolutely. I'm just thinking, I can remember a friend chatting to her. She has her own business, and she said, honestly, Flic, I could never work for anyone. I can only work for myself. I'm just thinking of that friend now, thinking, I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you fly the greatest flag and are the biggest advocate of people getting their diagnosis, because it just shifts everything. The ripple effect is huge in how you go about your day now, about your life.
Yeah. It is. And because it's understanding the brain wiring that was laid down for you, not by you. It means that we can finally step away from this perpetual cycle of shaming and criticizing ourselves for things that are not our faults.
Oh, gosh. I think anyone listening needs to let that land.
Yeah, that's why I paused. I don't normally pause. I need to keep talking normally. But that needs to sink in, really, that this brain, that is not your fault. It's not your fault if you have ADHD or if you are ADHD. There's a lot of conversations about that, about when we think about identity as this is a helpful thing. I was previously taught that we would have the person first and the description of any condition second. But we know in the neurodivergent community, say, not saying a person with autism, but actually an autistic person is what feels more affirmative, more accepting. So that's why this is a constant learning. So I might say things in this conversation that in 5 years from now, I'll look back and like cringe, because how could I speak about it like that? Like when my first awareness came of autism, it was called Asperger's syndrome, and we don't say that anymore. So Or ASD, we don't say that either. We now say an autistic person. So there's the same thing about ADHD, that we will be continually learning because there's so many things that are not known yet. And unfortunately, I'm sorry to bring in the P word of the patriarchy, but it's because a lot of the data we have has not been looking at the female experience of ADHD. This is why currently the average age of being diagnosed with ADHD is 36. Not
it?
5, 36.
Wow. Right. I'm not surprised though. I'm saying wow, but really this all makes bloody sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. But it's not just because of lack of awareness. It's also because life gets more complex for females women that age, both from an internal point of view, what's happening in our bodies, but also from an external point of view. You think about the average 36-year-old, she may or may not have children, which increases the number of spoons we have to use up every day. The decisions that are involved in mothering, the level of attention you have to use, especially if you have more than one child. I noticed a big difference for me in my ADHD brain when I went from one child to two, and I have to split my attention back and forth, meeting their respective needs.
Yeah.
It feels like it's never enough. So that hormonal side of things as well, that women are getting closer to perimenopause, or they might be postnatal, so we have a whirlwind of hormones going on in our body, and the changes in estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone can also be involved in that. So that's why it makes sense for it to be coming later in life. Some women feel it more when they've gone through, adolescence. So that's when their signs start to notice, because they're, going through puberty. Some women or girls or women feel it more when they've become pregnant, noticing that in the postnatal period, they then maybe struggle with postnatal depression or anxiety, or birth trauma is also more represented in ADHD women than it is in neurotypical women. So we may not even be about postnatal depression. It might actually be that you are so overwhelmed by life when you're becoming a parent. And I really struggled with the first year of parenthood, because I had a child who was, had lots of extra challenges. And I speak about that in my book and on my podcast as well. And knowing now that, I have the neurodivergent brain of having ADHD, I kind of send a heartfelt wish back to that version of me, the 32-year-old version of me, that had she just known, had I been able to inform the midwives and the children's center and all of that, that I needed that support, I would have thought very differently about, the impact on my brain from not having sleep at all. My first child didn't sleep for 4 years, and knowing now actually how important it is for my ADHD brain to sleep, there's a lot of things I wish I could go back and say, look, you're doing the best you can. It's not your fault. You're a great mother, and you're having a really hard time. And so is your child. So obviously we know that neurodivergence runs in families, so that you are statistically more likely to have a child who is ADHD, autistic, or both. So often I see that as a couples therapist as well, that when people come and they've noticed that their child has difficulties, they're going through assessment, they start to look to themselves and maybe even look to their partner, because neurodivergent people are more likely to couple up with other neurodivergent people.
Wow. Okay.
So I'll drop that one. Let that sink in as well. So now everyone's like, oh my goodness, what about my partner? And starting to look at their signs as well.
Fascinating. Oh my goodness. So when someone comes to you, Michaela, and says, oh, I'm curious, I'd like to pursue this path, how do you kind of help guide them?
Well, it's a delicate one, because I think this is powerful information that people need to feel that they're consenting to. Do I want this information? Do I want to invite this into my life right now? And because I also know of the initial unraveling that comes with diagnosis. If you don't meet criteria for diagnosis, what does that mean to you? Then how do you explain these behaviors? If you do meet criteria for diagnosis, what does that mean to you? And it's almost like we need to facilitate for a 6 to 12 month period of grief and rebuilding of yourself after diagnosis. This is why I built the ADHD club, I lovingly call it the club for the lost girls, the girls who weren't, spotted, the ones who got to 39 like I did, where life has got more complex. So I obviously got sidetracked and I forgot to say the second part of that. It's obviously the life is more complex, not just hormonally and what's going on within you, but also seniority. You look at the women you know who are sort of mid to late 30s, early 40s. We're in the most senior positions we have in our career. We might have, you know, the sandwich generation of young children and aging parents. Life is just flipping hard when you are our age. So then no wonder that that's when the symptoms come. It doesn't mean that everyone is a little bit ADHD these days. It doesn't mean that it's a question of just having stolen focus, to quote Johan Hari, who's been widely debated. Yes, our focus is stolen by all the smartphones, but yes, we also have different neurological wiring that makes that focus even more stolen for some of us, who are then grossly addicted to these things that give us dopamine hits, like Instagram, Candy Crush, or whatever it is that you do on your phone that you can't put down. So have a good think about that. Is that Wordle really serving you, or is that something that's, you know, taking up too much time in your life?
Oh, such a good point. Such a good point. Because it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure you're the same, because I know you work with people who are burnt out, and you have the Burnout to Burn Bright program, and think like it's hard for people to slow down, isn't it? And you know, people are like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I slow down? And I think you're speaking to this so beautifully, as to there's a thread here for people to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you said, what do we do if someone wants to pursue this diagnosis? Well, then you can go through an assessment. And I built my assessment service to be more inclusive and helpful in the sense of understanding yourself compassionately. You can go and see someone for far less money than you pay me for 1 hour. They will quickly run through some criteria. You will feel like it's a very medical interview. And they're like, right, okay, yes, you meet criteria for ADHD. And then like, then what? So what does that mean for like decades of learning I've had in my life? And your world will be cracked wide open when this happens. It's almost like akin to people going through a 12-step program, where you then have to go back to people in your life that you've hurt to make amends. I found myself doing that the other day when I messaged my first ever boyfriend I had from when I was 16 to 17. Such a sweetheart, you know, the best experience you can have into like puppy love. And I messaged him and said, how's life? You know, like, we're now 40 and I want to just, you know, tell you I have ADHD and I'm sorry for the things I did when we were 16. He was like, that's all right, I've survived life anyway. But that sense of the grief period I mentioned, the acceptance period, that when everything is kind of falling into place, it doesn't just feel good. So I think it's irresponsible to have assessment services where we just go through criteria and like, do I have this or do I not have this? Am I ADHD or am I not? Is what does that then mean? And how do we sit with it? And what are your support systems? And how can you work with this differently? So we obviously do assessment, coaching, but also therapy, because sometimes this is also related to traumas we've had in our life. Sometimes we've been humiliated because of how our experiences showed up for our life. We have been taken advantage of, or we've bent over backwards for people with that people pleasing, that we have lots of stuff to now heal. We maybe have had failed relationships that we wonder, why did that not go right? We unfortunately know that ADHDers are more likely to divorce than the neurotypical person. So there's a lot of healing to do.
Just thinking, oh, Michaela, thank you, because I just know this is going to really land for certain people. It's going to be, you know, a game changer.
I hope so. And that's kind of why I'm so passionate about doing the burnout prevention, of why I coined the group coaching program Burn Bright. I actually hadn't even received my diagnosis then, but I started looking at who was coming my way. And amongst all the perfectionism, procrastination, people pleasing, burnout, stress, anxiety, overthinking, overwhelm, all of these things that were coming my way, I was realizing that lots of the women who were coming to my way for help with perfectionism also had been a lost girl.
Yeah, absolutely. I love listening to your recent episodes on and you talk about the Lost Girl and the Lost Girl Club, and something that I just think, oh, is when you talk about the Lost Girl, she was, you know, she grew up feeling like she was too much, and then she also wasn't enough. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like how many of us felt that way?
Yeah, the feeling of being a bit extra and feeling like I can't quite fit in. I'm not doing the right things or I'm not saying the right things. And to kind of borrow Brene Brown's research around vulnerability and belonging, I think the biggest lesson I've learned with the ADHDness now is that the more I am vulnerable and disclosing that to the right people, the more I find connection and belonging with people, because they're like, oh, come this way, we like you. And I almost like have this as a criteria now, almost, that anyone who I really gel with, I'm like, you must be neurodivergent, like if you liking me. It's almost like a criteria in itself. And having just had an experience of solo traveling to Vietnam, on what I called my spacious adventure. I just came back on Monday this week. I met. Yeah, I did. I don't know if you've seen that on social media, but yeah, I did. I gave that as a gift to myself for, to continue this kind of progress of healing. And having turned 40, my husband had been saving money for a while for me to be able to travel away. So he had the kids, I went away. And oh my God, the dopamine of constantly seeing new environments, meeting new people, eating new food. Yeah, so that's led me to plan a retreat in retreat in Vietnam next year, for just finding this sense of stillness and how hard it is for people to come to slowing down. So that's why I work with women in at least 6 months period in Burn Bride. Some people will renew and come for another round because it just takes that long to layer up these approaches where you realize, this is why I can't slow down. This is why I resist meditation or going to yoga, or because my brain just bounces around. I can't lie still on the mat. I just don't like it. And, I've been practicing meditation and mindfulness and yoga and been in CBT therapy and like all of these things I've been doing since I came into psychology as a 19-year-old. So my brain has been scaffolded already by these practices, by these tools, in a way that other people who are not psychologists haven't had. And I dread to think how chaotic my brain would be had I not had all of those things.
Right. But I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you're the perfect person to come to and have kind of walk alongside you on this path if you're exploring this, because you get it. You get it. You've been there, and the compassion that comes from you, it's beautiful, because it's so hard to, when you spent decades criticizing yourself, hearing the criticism of others, you're too much, like, what are you doing? Calm down. And then there's the frustration of, in some circles, people are like, oh my God, you're too much, this is amazing. You're kind of, who am I? Where am I? Where are my people? Yeah. So to be able to come to you and have them, hold their hand, walk alongside them, it's so powerful.
And I think that's really true there, like, who are my people? And even knowing that when you are with your quote unquote people, that even too much of a good thing can be too much. That when you are with people who are like-minded and you're like, I'm busting off this, I'm loving it, you might still find a bit of a hangover the next day. I sometimes refer to that as the hyper-focus hangover. You've just been really in the zone of loving it, and then you still need to plan in the recovery afterwards. So when I go to, say, deliver a talk, I did a talk in Oxford recently for the Oxford MBA program, talking about resilience, and I was loving it so much. I was on a panel, I was giving my most witty self, and the next day I was like, oh. So I'd planned in to have an overnight stay. My husband was coming with. He was driving me to this event because driving is not great for me. It triggers overwhelm, and driving into Oxford, it would not be possible. So he came with me, drove, and then we stayed in a really nice hotel afterwards. And yeah, that means that eats into my profits, because I booked an hotel for this 1 hour talk I was doing. But I don't care, because that feeling of being well is worth so much more to me than the money of taking home the whole fee. So I've learned that over the years, that I need different things to be well in my business and in my life than the neurotypical person. And now that I no longer struggle against that and just have surrendered into it, I'm so much more fulfilled and content, because I know the brain I have is not my fault, but it's my responsibility to meet the needs that my brain has. So that's the bit that I think takes 6 to 12 months. to come to that realization, and then to allow someone to show you the ropes, to allow someone to show you the compassionate tools you need to let yourself be well and happy with the brain that you got.
Oh my gosh, Michaela. I'm actually finding this quite emotional. That was so lovely that your husband drove you and supported you. But the fact that you were able to go, I'm doing this, it's going to be amazing. I'm going to love it. And so to set myself up, I'm going to have a hotel. He's going to drive me. Like, did you ask him? Did he offer? Like, it's just, it changes everything, doesn't it? When you have that awareness and knowledge, it empowers you. And so things can only go for the best.
It can only go for the best because it also helps your relationship. When I am well, my marriage is going well. When I am well, I am a much better mother. When I am not well, when I'm depleted, when I am near burnout, I'm not happy and I'm not well, and nobody benefits from that. Nobody benefits from my burnout. And if you're being crass about it in a cynical way, I run my own business. The government doesn't benefit from me not being well, because then I don't generate the same amount of revenue and then don't pay the same amount of tax. I like paying tax. I come from Sweden, like we pay our tax, and it helps. It's another way for me to be able to contribute to society. So when I'm earning well, because the business is thriving, because I am thriving, I'm also having another way of contributing to society because I pay taxes. So yeah, I don't like to do my tax return, but that's why I have a support system around that. My accountant does that. But jokes aside, I think it's about understanding yourself really intimately, compassionately. That self-awareness piece is everything. Because when you understand that, you can also then manage your energy and not just manage your time, to think about, what do I need to be well? How will I thrive this week? It means you can start to think about your cyclical patterns. If I'm talking to people who have a period or have a cycle, it might mean that you think about the different weeks of the month and who you are. In my case, I have PMDD as well, which means it's premenstrual dysphoria. Oh, premenstrual, I can't even say it now. PMDD, premenstrual dysphoria disorder, which about 50 to 60% even of ADHDers have. So that when we then understand that link with our hormones, I can then plan my business accordingly. I don't do really big stretchy talks in the PMT week, because that's when I need to really conserve all my energy to not be a horrible human being to my children, right? So I can't use up all the spoons at work in that week, because I really want to be the mother I want to be. And not in a perfect way, not in a never make mistakes, never fail, never lose your shit, just in a I deserve to be well kind of way. I deserve to not feel awful as well. So that's why I've do all of these different things, why I've designed that kind of the well-being rhythm I need to have. It's essentially a way of managing my condition. And people will probably come at me for saying condition, because there's a lot of discussions in the neurodivergent community about that. But say this differently wired brain I have, what is it that I need to look after that? Much like we would show diabetic people what they need to be well in terms of exercise, nutrition, and self-care. So that's how I see compassionate care for the ADHD brain.
Oh, so lovely. Because it's when you burn out, you know, I'm sure you feel the same. It's that initial period of, you just have to hit the pause button. But it's not just a case of lie in bed for a couple of weeks, watch Netflix, eat Maltesers. I tried it. It doesn't work. You have to then foundational pieces. And I think that's the work of burnout that people don't necessarily expect. But when they're navigating that, it's important to have people like you coaching, like just that kind of insight to help them navigate it, because it's tricky. It's you've been carrying these patterns for decades. You can't
Absolutely
off like a light switch, can you?
You can't. And Russell Barkley, who's a world-leading expert on ADHD, uses a metaphor that I'm going to steal because I love it.
Yeah.
He talks about how when people have a physical disability, say someone who's a wheelchair user, and they might need ramp for having accessibility into a home, right? they might have these physical adaptations to help things be accessible for them. We wouldn't say after 6 months to that person, I'm going to take away the ramp now because you've probably, you've learned how to use this and you've internalized this ramp and you don't need it anymore. You wouldn't say that. No, that's madness, because they continue to use the wheelchair, so they continue to need that accessibility. With hidden disabilities like ADHD, the assumption is that we somehow have learned stuff like, why don't you just do a time management course at work and then you've learned to be punctual, so then you don't need that anymore. Well, we can't internalize the ramp. We still have the brain that we have, and it continues to need the scaffolding. And this is something I used to see in therapy, where sometimes people had repeated episodes of therapy where they felt such shame and sense of failure when they were coming back again for more input. And that is because it's really difficult for us to internalize the ramp. You probably do need to have ongoing support. Maybe you come back for an episode and like, I really want to focus on my self-criticism in this episode, or next episode of input, you might feel, I really want to work on some healthier habits that I can stick to, that don't become perfectionistic. And like, I want to learn how to look after myself better with sleep, eating good, nutritious food, drinking enough water, which we know ADHDers really struggle with. And there is no shame or failure in that. And that is why I love working in private practice as well, because I can assess based on need and give based on need, not saying to someone, you've had your 12 sessions, next, I can't give you any more because it's someone else's turn. I can work with people as long as they need, when they need, and it's all based on the function of what will this unlock for you? What is this support going to give you? And not in a sense of, I'm keeping you with me, because my job is to teach people how to fish and not just give them fish for the day. But equally knowing that the evidence base suggests that when people get to come for maintenance sessions of therapy or coaching to boost what they're doing and keep them on track, we're much more likely to keep things like burnout, depression, anxiety, and stress at bay.
Yeah, and it's so important. And as you say, like, the ripple effect is huge. When we look after ourselves, we're better parents, we're better partners, we're just, everyone benefits from it.
Yeah.
And it's so important, because I think so many women we've just been raised in a society that is, self-care is selfish, and it's very it's just very self-centered to be focusing on yourself like this, but it's just so wrong.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is the pressure of the patriarchy for you. And this is what I'm sort of writing on in my second book about perfectionism, is that it's a sense that this expectation of being a good girl, and that wiring, that narrative that we have, that you shouldn't speak up, you shouldn't ask for your needs to be met. That means it's really difficult for when I'm then training people in therapy or coaching to be more compassionate. It's really hard because it goes against the grain of our society. So it's not just about an internal pressure that we have of high standards for, I need to be perfect, or I need to act a certain way, I need to always be in control, I can't make mistakes, I can't fail. It's also the external expectation we have that we know is more unforgiving towards women than it is towards men. So whether that's me getting on a bit of a soapbox there, but I need that to be said, because that is also part of the compassion piece, that it's not your fault. It's kind of feeling less shame for the fact that you are self-critical. It's feeling less ashamed of the fact that you are a people pleaser, because society has built you that way. Society benefits from when you are depleted.
Yeah, it's not your fault. I think it's so important we say that in regards to burnout and ADHD. Like it because I think that is the one kind of thing people who experience burnout, who are going, down that path of diagnosis, you're so used to being anchored to the what do I do wrong? Like why,
Yeah.
That self-blame is huge.
Yeah, and that's why the resilience piece is one that I struggle with, and why I spoke a lot about self-compassion when I did this talk recently. Because resilience can also be another shit stick to beat yourself with. Saying, I just wasn't resilient enough. If I had been more resilient and sturdy or robust, and these other words we use, then this work environment that I was in, I wouldn't have burnt out. And look at these other people, they have not burnt out. And I've grappled with that myself. Like, why was it that I had to leave the NHS services I was working in and now work in private practice, when I see some of my former colleagues still work in that way? And it's not really relevant because that comparison is, it's unfair to compare, and it leaves you in despair, essentially. When we compare our brains and what we need to thrive to what other people need, it's like comparing different plants. Some of us need more water, some of us need more sunlight. There's just certain requirements, different requirements that we have. So it's not a deficit, it's a difference. We're not defective, we are different. And in order to be well, we have to accept that difference and think, what do I need? What's the kind of compassionate soil and sunlight and nurture that this plant needs, that the plant that I am? And I know that I'm thriving and blossoming now that I've been running my own company for the past decade. And I wasn't the same way when I worked in the NHS.
Yeah.
It just wasn't the right place for me. And despite knowing all the good work I've done, and I will always be grateful, and I will always remember all the patients whose lives I've touched or moved or saved even.
Yeah.
And that will always leave a mark on me. That's paved the path to where I am now. But I just couldn't do that work if it was taking such a personal expense on me, because what good could I do in the world if I burnt out? Because from personal experience how long that journey to recovery can be. It's not like you're saying 2 weeks off and
Oh my gosh.
I'm just going to go and have a couple of weeks holiday and I'll be restored. We're talking about, the shortest I've seen is maybe 3 months, but in reality, more like 2 years of work.
Yes, absolutely. I can remember when I first burnt out, that was my daily Google search. How long does it take to recover? How long does it? And yeah, I was 2 years. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Depends on the reason for it. And obviously if there's ongoing difficulties, say in the workplace, if that environment is a big part of it.
Yeah, you need foundation for sure, because I think that's another thing I've experienced, and other people I know have experienced. You have to look at the circle around you, and that's when you're like, okay, are we aligned?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's not easy again, which is why it's having support is really good, because those are very difficult conversations and thoughts to be having. And as you say, you hit on this, there's a grief element to it, because if you think, oh my gosh, this circle, I don't know if this does not serve me, doesn't reflect on who I am and doesn't align. And so that circle, you find that naturally people will fall away, but there's a real grief period to that.
Yeah, there is. And then there's an adjustment as well of knowing that if you're going to come back to life now, that life needs to look different, because that's, the Einstein is supposed to have said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I've seen people when they come through their third, fourth, fifth burnout episode and finally realize, okay, I've now hit rock bottom so many times, something's got to give. And if nothing changes, then nothing changes. You will have the same results. And knowing, again, I keep coming back to the ADHD piece, because this is obviously not just for ADHD. I see people who have repeated burnout episodes who are not neurodivergent, of course, but I see that repeated pattern of burnout episodes more so in ADHD, because it's so hard to have that interoceptive awareness of when you've had enough, when is it too much for you? Because even when you feel that you are too much, and you also then still feel at the same time, like I said, like you're never enough, and you need to do more and be more and have more. And enoughness is a really triggering concept for the people I work with who have perfectionistic standards. Enough feels like failure. Enough feels really triggering. It feels like if I then say, I'll just do good enough, it feels like admitting that you weren't good enough, that you couldn't cut it. So that phrase of like, you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen, as a way to put blame on people who get burnt out.
Yeah.
Well, if you can't stand the heat, it's because someone needs to adjust the temperature. And often that isn't done centrally. And we then look at people as expendable, and they just get thrown out saying, next, who's the next person we can abuse? So this is why it's so important to have that awareness of the internal pressures you're under, your own high expectations, perfectionistic beliefs, your brain wiring, and the external pressure, the environment you're in, what heat is that putting on you? Because otherwise, if it is a toxic environment and it's nothing to do with your internal pressure, etc., you move environment, right? And you feel that you're able to heal. We can't blame a flower for not blossoming if it's in a toxic environment. Like, it's not going to be conducive to growth, right? So we then moved that plant to a different pot with new nurturing soil where it can thrive and grow. But what if the soil you're bringing with you, what if the roots you're bringing with you, what if all your experiences, all the ways that you are wired, means that when you plant it in a different pot, you take the burnout behavior with you? That's what I often see when people have this internal pressure as well. And that means that they go into a new environment and they create that toxic environment right there as well. And that's not saying that there's any blame. It is not shaming. It's not saying you are not resilient enough. It's not saying you caused your own burnout. I'm saying that this is a very difficult, complex ecosystem of reactions between your inner world and your outer world. And you need to take the time to understand that. This is why burnout or perfectionism or working with ADHD cannot be a quick fix. I just refuse to work with things in a very short-term way when it comes to this level of complexity.
Oh my gosh, this is so good to hear, and so good for other people to hear, because there's a lot of pieces on the table.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
There's a lot there.
Michaela, this has been
so good to talk to you about this, because I just, my heartfelt wish for anyone listening is that if you are almost like allergic to compassion or allergic to stillness, like, don't beat yourself up for it. There's a reason why this is hard. And we can start by being compassionate to ourselves about how hard it is to be compassionate to ourselves. It's a bit meta, but if you start there by saying, goodness me, it's really understandable that I'm having a hard time with not giving myself a hard time because I've been raised that way, or I have a brain that's maybe actually half empty, glass half empty. We know that the brain in ADHD has a negativity bias where you might be looking at the world in a half empty way. It's not because you're a pessimistic person who's not fun to be around. It's not your fault. But meeting someone who understands that and gives you the ropes, shows you the ropes, can make all the difference. And this is why I created the ADHD Club, for having a compassionate community for these lost girls to be able to talk to other people and let all of our stuff just hang out. The fact that you the stuff you do day in and day out with ADHDness, you think that other people can do this, like adulting, and I don't seem to be able to. And then the stuff you overthink and the stuff you worry about, and knowing that there are other women there who'd be like, yeah, I know, I've got that one.
Yes, exactly. That's the power of community, isn't it? And it's so important. And we're so hardwired for community, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. We need connection to survive. We know that loneliness is a bigger killer than cardiovascular disease. So if you feel alone sitting with this, you feel ashamed sitting with this, we know that you're more likely to feel depressed. So having a space where you can drop the mask, where you can drop the shame, where you can be vulnerable, because vulnerability feeds connection, even if that is like 5% vulnerability. Like, I have women in my Burn Bright group coaching program who are experimenting with, like, I'm just going to be 5% vulnerable and show something, and then noticing that they can then receive kindness and care, compassion coming in, and noticing that nothing bad happens when you're vulnerable in the right spaces. Then you can be brave in those spaces and notice that people can then accept you, and you feel like you have a place to belong. I feel like, as a 40-year-old woman, that I have the best friendships I've ever had in my life, because those friends accept me for who I am. I don't have to be like, oh no, don't say that, or don't be so extra. It's about finding the right people I can talk to for hours, and then time passes and you realize, oh yeah, I didn't have to mask. I could just be myself.
I didn't have to mask, or I didn't have to dampen myself down or dilute myself. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so it's just a beautiful feeling when you begin to have a circle around you of people that love you for who you are, and there's no more criticism or questioning, because we already do that ourselves. We don't need any help.
Yeah, we do that all the time, and we have that rejection sensitivity where we'll be on the lookout for rejection even before it happens, because it physically hurts. Yes. Rejection, or RSD, or rejection sensitivity dysphoria, is something that affects the ADHD brain, where if you look at it, the brain in a brain scanner, and you give someone a negative comment or do something that makes them feel rejected, the part of the brain that controls pain, that center lights up in the scanner, so that when you're actually emotionally hurt or feeling rejected, it physically hurts for ADHDers.
Wow. No way.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Oh
It's
my.
mortifying. This is why we're like, oh, cringe, I can't cope with this. And this is, it
Well,
explains a lot of the avoidance patterns people have as well.
yeah, it knocks you for six. And then you're like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah, everyone hates me.
Goodness. Wow. Oh, Michaela,
Yeah.
I feel like we're going to have to do a part 2 of this because
Well, let's hear from the listeners. So, let us know what you want us to talk more about. What of
yes.
this conversation has brought
Oh my gosh,
interesting reflections for you?
Absolutely. This has just been incredible. And I know, oh my gosh, I know it's going to really help cause a beautiful shift for some people listening.
I hope so. I hope so.
Michaela, thank you. Thank you so much for your time, but just your lovely I've always found your voice very soothing, but just your lovely compassion, because it's just, we need to remember we need that permission piece from people, don't we? And that role model. And I think just you sharing the story of you booking a hotel and then your husband driving you and everything setting up for success, everything setting up for being a really positive, just that role modeling alone will cause a shift for some people.
It does, and that's why I've sort of done a lot of work on myself as well. And I think I like the phrase of, we can speak from a scar, not from a wound. That whenever I do processing on my own, I don't think about when am I ready to share that, when am I ready to process that, when is it, too raw and too open, and I can't process it and I can't share it just yet. So that's why I took, time to cocoon on this, and I wasn't speaking about ADHD, I was speaking about perfectionism, but it didn't feel right to my community to keep hiding that away, because then I was, an accomplice in the masking, an accomplice in the pressure. So speaking out about this, taking that vulnerability piece and saying, look, I have an ADHD brain. And it also means it makes it a lot easier for me to call in the right people to work with me, because then they already know. They're not going to be surprised if I show up 3 minutes late on a Zoom call, and I'll do my very best not to. But it's like I did today. I was 2 minutes late for your conversation, and I had the best of intentions to be here punctually.
Didn't even register.
No,
I was quite happy, just sat here with my coffee, relaxing, getting all excited. Didn't even register. Just goes to show, doesn't it?
Yeah, but some people do, and it's like we often notice our own struggles a lot more than other people notice our struggles. That's the kind of thing of self-criticism as well, that we have such a strong spotlight of attention on our own flaws, and other people don't really notice them to the same extent. But I think that's why being vulnerable and being open with who you are does bring that sense of connection. And I know that I'm not everyone's cup of tea. There will be people who will not want to work with someone who's a neurodivergent therapist, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I don't have to be everyone's cup of tea. No. This is kind of the lesson through life, that I don't have to be everyone's cup of tea, but I am someone's tea party. And that's how I am. That's how I do things with my home retreats as well. When the Burn Bright women come to my home, I throw them a tea party. Aww. Literally take out my finest china and pamper them and look after them, because that's how I think of it. I am someone who stands there with tea and a croissant and like, let me look after you, because you look after everyone else and nobody is looking after you.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my goodness. This was divine timing. I'm just thinking, it's interesting when you were saying like it took you time and you didn't want to share it straight away, because I definitely relate to that in the sense of, I've definitely experienced some things in my life with burnout recovery and lots of shifts happening, all for the better, but, big shifts in life. And, I think it's so important to, again, not beat yourself up. And when you're an entrepreneur or you're, self-employed and you think, oh, I must do Instagram, I've got to keep doing it. Actually, you know what? You are allowed to be human and go through this period. But I'm just listening and I'm thinking, oh, this is divine timing, because we started trying to plot this podcast a couple of years ago, and it's been
a while, yeah.
And last summer we were meant to, and something happened where I couldn't, and I had to go back to England, and there was a big consequence of that too. And oh my God, this is divine timing. This couldn't be any better. It really.
So I take it you join me in Vietnam for my retreat next year then.
Oh my God, I so am. I'm like, how on earth can I manifest that? I want a cup of tea with you in Vietnam.
Let me give you my spacious adventure. Those are my 2 words for this year. For myself is that 2024 is my spacious adventure. Like allow myself to scratch the dopamine itch of like wanting to have stimulating, fun, exciting things, but doing it in a spacious way that feels like sustainable rather than like more. It's like do something and then come back, scaffolding it, book ending it, basically, like I did for the talk. Go and give a vibrant talk and then go relax in the sauna at the hotel afterwards. Like I constantly have to bookend things that way, and that means I'm more likely to be well. So yeah, my spacious adventure, and I just absolutely loved what I planned in Vietnam. So if anyone wants to have a planned route through Vietnam, then let me know. I'm also a trained travel agent, as you do. It's one of my many hyper focuses. I'm like, oh, shall I just do that too?
Another feather in the hat.
Yeah, it's much more fun that way. A bit extra, like I said.
Extra. You know what? My words for this year are bold and shine, because for so long I have been like, I'm too much. I've got to calm it. I've got to sort myself out. And I'm like, fuck it. Enough now.
You're not too much. You're not too much. You're just bold and shine.
Why can't I just be bloody me? Fuck it. So that's where I oh my God, I'm coming to Vietnam.
You're also, you're also midlife clarity in that sense. That, if we can't do it in our fucking 40s, when are we doing it?
When can we? I'm on it.
Yeah.
I'm on it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Michaela. Okay, so at the end of these amazing conversations, I'm so grateful for this one. Thank you. I've been asking my guests light-hearted, quick-fire questions. So, they're easy. On your dodgy, tough days, do you opt for move your body or move the remote?
Move your body.
Yeah. Get it out there. That's it.
Yeah, you can't think your way out of it. You have to move your way out of it.
Oh, I love that. You can't think your way out of it. You have to move your way out of it. The 50th mic drop for this interview. Okay, bag of almonds or bag of Maltesers?
Almonds. I love almonds, but I prefer almond butter. But yeah.
Ooh, okay.
Or chocolate covered almonds.
Chocolate covered almonds. I love those. Ask for help or happy to hermit?
Ooh, I am unhappy about asking for help, but I also don't like to hermit. So I'm going to have to say ask for help.
I know. It's a practice. I'm getting better, but it doesn't come natural. Okay. And then what's the one self-compassionate thing you're going to do today that your future self will thank you for?
Going to sit down with my Muse meditation, because I absolutely love it.
Oh, lovely.
So sitting down it's a fantastic thing that tracks your brain waves. So you get to see that you get the dopamine of like seeing how calm was I, and how many little birds you get for all the times you were focused. So yeah, I love it. So I'm going to do that before I do the school run.
Okay, amazing. Oh, Michaela, thank you. I'm going to put in the show notes where everyone can find all of your stuff. And, this was just amazing. Thank you.
It was so good to talk to you. Hopefully you will come onto my Pause, Purpose, Play podcast next, and we can continue the conversation about burnout.
I know. I feel like, oh my gosh, we're just scratching the surface of a few things. And anyone listening,
Indeed.
Want more? Send your questions in, and we'll do
another round.
We'll do another
in 2
one.
years. 2 years or so.
On the beach in Vietnam.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Flic. It's been amazing to talk to you today.
Oh, okay. You take care. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Everyday Burnout Conversations. Take a peek at the show notes for any links to items discussed today. And if you want to continue the burnout conversation, you can find me on social media at Flic Taylor Writes, or you can head to my website, flictaylor.com, if you're curious and want to learn more on what it's like to work with me one-to-one. So in the meantime, rest up, don't forget to take good care of you, and bye for now.